And if you all wouldn't mind putting yourselves on mute, that would be helpful. And as we're gathering in this space, it's always wonderful to see in the chat, if you're comfortable putting it, where you're coming from, on whose lands you reside, and what waters you honor as you're in this space. And I thank you for finding us here despite all the different time zones and time clocks changing and this and that and the other. But you have made it, and you create this as a sacred space by being here. So we're delighted that you are all sharing this time with us from wherever you're coming. So please do engage in the chat as you feel comfortable, and you'll see the recordings on, but it will not capture your names or anything that you put in the chat. And I will record out, I will edit out anything if anybody breaks in at any point to share anything, or at the end. And at the end, I'll turn off the recording. You're welcome to stay and chat for a little bit if you have anything that is sitting on your heart that you need to share. But with that being said, I am absolutely delighted to welcome back Juliet Patterson. Some of you will remember, I think it was 2 years ago, Juliet, that you were here with us before, sharing your deeply moving book, Sinkhole, with us. And just cannot wait to dig into the practice that you're sharing with us today. So thank you so much for leading us, and I hand it over to you. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Margaret. Amazing to see where you're all coming from. I'm in Minneapolis, in the center of the United States, lands of the Dakota and Lakota, waters of the Mississippi, and also Gitche Gumee, a very important body of water to me personally. So grateful to be here. I can't think of anything more important than for us to keep gathering together, looking each other in the eyes, reducing harm, and taking care of each other. And that's what I've learned more deeply in the last couple of months, just being in Minneapolis, which has been sort of the epicenter of attacks from the administration and still going on. But as many of you may have seen, that there's a lot of people in our community that really came together in beautiful ways. And part of what we're doing today is a little bit inspired by that experience. I found myself feeling a little bit wordless in the month of January when the kind of assault, and I will use that word meaningfully, was so prevalent in the city, and it cast a real cloud over like everything. I'm a poet and a writer by trade, so words are the first place I turn, but for whatever reason, I just wasn't able to find language for what was happening. And so I returned to imagery, and in particular, the tarot cards. Um, I wouldn't describe myself as a diviner, but I was telling Margaret that my mother had tarot cards around when I was a young child, and so I got introduced to them early. So I'm not going to give you a lesson about the tarot cards, but if you get interested in some of the imagery, I encourage you to poke around and find out more. They're an ancient art form, of course, of divination, and we're going to look at images from the Rider-Waite deck. And again, I'm not going to spend time telling you too much about that, but there's a really interesting history to that deck. And I've chosen 3 cards for today, and we're going to engage in a process that I call poetic divination. Essentially, we're going to use these images and the archetypes that they stand for to reflect on some questions about ourselves. And I think that I'm deeply interested, I know this circle probably is interested in this question too, which is, how do we bring our full selves to this moment? There are many ways to participate, and we can certainly think about a spiritual lens, but I think we're all being called to engage civically in ways maybe that we haven't before, or at least that's how I feel. So I'm going to share my screen, and really this just involves some quick or short, I should say, short writing reflections, which will lead to a slightly longer reflection at the end, and hopefully we'll have some time to reflect and share together. So these are kind of the questions that are driving this activity. So in this time, and you can think about this time broadly, in this time that we are in, maybe you could answer one of these questions in the chat if you're comfortable doing that, or just jot down some quick answers before we get started. What do you think is being asked of you in this time? What are you holding alone? What belongs to the collective? And what kind of attention do you think you can give that is healing? Again, we're all in very different places in the world. We might be facing different kinds of circumstances. So I just want you to take a minute to reflect on these questions. And now that we've kind of tapped into maybe where we are, what we're feeling, I want you to think about some core values that you hold that help you engage with your community, your spiritual or your inner life. We're going to do that question first in the bold. So again, just jotting down some ideas about core values that guide how you engage with your community, your spiritual or your inner life. And then try to list 3 potential core values that answer this question, but also are values you associate with pleasure or joy. So my examples are love or liberation or well-being. The values you first wrote down may already be associated with pleasure, but if they aren't, try to find a few that are also you associate with pleasure. Now that you have a little list of some core values, I want you to hone in on one that holds the most resonance for you at this time. So in this moment, this is the one we're going to work with for the next 25 minutes or so. And I do encourage you to write that value at the top of a page and kind of circle it. Could be a word, could be a phrase, whatever is best for you. And from here, we're going to sort of ask questions about this value using the archetype of the major arcana in the tarot. So the tarot cards they're much like playing cards. They have cards that are major arcana, and there's 21 of them. There are archetypal figures that represent different attributes. And as I introduce you to the cards, I'll give you a little bit of information about the card from a variety of perspectives, mostly my perspective. The way you're taught to read tarot cards is to sort of learn the cards and then come up with your own interpretation. And that's just to give you context. And then there'll be one question that's sort of centered around the card. And we're going to write for about 4 minutes, 3 to 4 minutes on each question, not very long. And there'll be 3 cards. And at the end of that, we're going to do something with that writing. Okay. So the first card we're going to look at is Justice. Probably not a surprise this card came to mind in the last 6 months or so. I do think we are sort of culturally, certainly in America, but maybe possibly in the global scene, facing a lot of concerns about justice. Justice in the tarot is the advocate. It's a card that's probing for the truth and the articulation of truth. It also restores the world as a multi-sensorial place. It's very interested. We might think of this card, if we look at it, holding the scales of justice and a sword as being lawful and that sort of traditional view of justice. But really in the tarot, it's reminding us that there are many ways for justice to appear. And one of them is through connecting in a multi-sensory way with the world. So connecting with others outside of humans, connecting with animal life, plant life, and the like. It's the bridge between symbolic and physical realities. And justice stands for a kind of world ordering, law in sort of a more poetic sense, right? Not just legal sense. And it often reminds me of this line from June Jordan, who said that the syntax of a sentence equals the structure of your consciousness. So it's thinking about, when we think about justice, what are the words we speak or think, and how do they equal our consciousness? The vow the card of justice takes is I cast for the righteous. In other words, I stand for the righteous. And so my question to you to reflect on for the next 3 minutes is, how is your core value a site of resistance? And I did add the word fascist here, which I realize is quite strong, but I do think we are facing a fascist regime. So how is your core value a site of fascist resistance, or simply of resistance, if that's more comfortable for you? How is your core value a site of resistance? So let's take 3 or 4 minutes and try to answer that question. Okay, I'm going to stop you there. Moving on to the tower. When people see this card in the tower, they think it's, they react very viscerally. It is the Tower of Babel, which is depicted here with bodies falling out of it and fire and thunder claps coming down. It looks very destructive. It is about structures coming undone or falling down, but it's also a card that's telling you there's more possibility than you know. That if you dive deep into the chaos, you will come out completely differently. And that sometimes you need to risk disorientation. Sometimes you need to speak in paradox. Sometimes the tower asks you to see what lies beyond the limits of your imagination. It's asking you to reimagine in ways you may not have thought of. So the vow of the tower is I return, this idea that you will return to some inner knowing only by being willing to strip yourself bare in a way. So the question I have for you in relation to this card is, what will your core value deconstruct within you? What will your core value deconstruct within you? What does it help you see beyond the limits of your imagination? And we'll take another 3 minutes. And lastly, we have the star. And the star shows a naked water bearer pouring water into the lake and also on the land. And you can see there's so much water that it's pooling everywhere. And there's a funny little bird back here in the tree and lots of stars in the sky. And to me, this card is about irrigating love. It's a card that's very hopeful, a card of to remind us that hope has like a fragile resiliency. Hope is also hard to hold on to because it's so gentle. It's this idea of the waters pouring very gently, and it uncovers beauty where it may not necessarily exist. I think that's a really important practice for all of us right now, is to see beauty where it may not necessarily exist. And hope can only be possible as we make space to accommodate our disappointments, our disorientation, as kind of a redirection. And so the prompt here is, I blank anyway. I blank anyway. What does your core value do? And anyway, so regardless, it's going to see beauty where it may not necessarily exist anyway. So I'm going to give you 3 minutes to think about that. And if you're so inclined, some of us are sharing lines inside the chat, which is beautiful. I have inner stillness and calm anyway. I'm loved anyway, and I will keep loving anyway. Peaceful resistant is measured, grounded, not reactive. Peace trusts in myself and in others. Peace says no to separateness. So I want you to think about these sentences you've strung together as a kind of poem, as your own sort of divinatory poem to yourself, but they can also be thought of as a manifesto or a little mantra that you carry. What I find so interesting is that the questions themselves are leading you in different directions, but when you take one answer from each question and put them together, they seem to cohere in some sort of really interesting way. And for me, this was a practice that was really, really helpful when I was feeling a little bit ungrounded and disoriented from the news or the events or some of the sorrow and suffering that we have to sort of see and face every day. And it helped me to touch into that sort of deeper knowing. But I also found that the questions themselves and the archetypes for and what they represent helped me merge this idea of spiritual and political or spiritual and active or spiritual and community, which is, I think, what we're all kind of being asked to do right now in our own way. But I would love to know, we have just a very few minutes, and I know we can stay a little bit longer than time allows, but would anyone like to share or speak to what this was like, or even read your poetic divination?